Happy Wednesday, everyone. Really pleased to welcome Jennifer Paine to this weekly live. It's going to be the second last one we do before the end of the year. Jennifer, really happy to have you here.
Thank you, Alex. I'm very happy to be here too.
Awesome. So we're going to be talking about life after layoffs. And, we don't know if you've been laid off yourself, if you know someone affected by the layoffs. I worked with Meta. And although I wasn't personally affected by the first round of layoffs, I know a lot of people who are. I was in a team of 50 plus people. I think there's only 2 there now. And Jennifer, I know you worked at LinkedIn. I'm not sure if they suffered them. We both work with people in the tech sector. And that's how we basically working together at HiBob. We can talk about that too. But Jennifer, maybe you want to introduce yourself to people who don't know you and share what you're about.
Of course. Yeah. So hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Paine. I am half Dutch, half English. And as Alex mentioned, we met working at HiBob, where we collaborated when I was a sales manager there. I started my career as a recruiter and then did a massive career switch into tech, where I mainly worked in sales, got promoted to being a manager. And while working at LinkedIn, which was my first employer in tech, I got introduced to coaching. And basically, I've been coaching people ever since. And while working in my full-time job, the coaching just kept going besides the full-time job. And at some point, it just was almost unmanageable to do both at the same time. And that's how I decided to eventually start my own business. So I'm now a career coach for women in tech.
Awesome. And before we dive into the subject, I just want to share a couple of fun things about how we met. Because you're half Dutch and half British, as am I. I'm born in.
I know.
Opposite things. I have a Dutch surname, but was born in the UK. You have an English surname, but was born in the Netherlands. Just a
correct
life. Yeah.
Yeah.
And before we dive into life after layoffs, let's just talk about the people who come to us, because I've had situations in life and people come to me where they're not happy with their career and they want something different, or they have been affected by being laid off or fired, made redundant, and they have no idea what to do. And Jennifer, you work with some pretty impressive companies, HiBob, LinkedIn, before coaching. But have you ever been affected personally by, layoffs yourself? Because I actually don't know about if LinkedIn ever went through a round of layoffs. I know they didn't Meta, so I know a lot of people who have. What's your personal experience?
Yeah, good question. So first off, thankfully, I've never been laid off myself. I have, however, seen many people around me been laid off. So when I was working for LinkedIn, they did was basically a round of layoffs, but they called it a restructuring. Just in that COVID time, which was a very it was a very sad time, because we saw many colleagues go. And even though I wasn't laid off myself, you're still very aware of everything that's going on in the organization when the word comes out that there will be a round of layoffs or restructuring, and so many people from that department will be impacted, so many people from that department, but nobody has clarity around who it's going to be, when we will find that out. And then you actually hear the names at some point, and then you realize that some very valuable colleagues, friends are impacted. So on the one hand, you're thankful that it wasn't you, and on the other hand, you're super sad and disappointed that it's someone, maybe a close friend of yours. So what about you, Alex? How's that been for you?
Yeah, every single time it's been traumatic, especially in some of the ways that the companies I've worked with have handled it. For instance, when I worked at Meta, the way that they dealt with it, in my opinion anyway, and it's only my opinion, just wasn't great. From one day to the other, people woke up in the morning and a huge chunk of them couldn't access their laptops anymore. And that's how they basically knew they were laid off.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, we live in Europe, and it works a bit differently than in the US, where you can do that in the US. In Europe, I remember that like Twitter, now X.com, tried to do that. They actually did that, and then they still had to pay the people who didn't access any of their laptops with data anymore. You gave them like a notice or something like that, or a severance. I guess the point here is really around like how companies deal with it, because layoffs could be inevitable, and there's many reasons for that. I even read the other day, I think yesterday, Spotify laid off like 10 to 15% of their workforce. So I mean, whilst this is going to help, this live mainly about helping people who have been laid off. Jennifer, what do you think companies can do differently, or how can they manage a situation? Because let's be honest, layoffs could be inevitable. Maybe they have to happen, or maybe they don't have to happen. Maybe there's some suggestions you have for companies about how they can prevent it in the first place. What do you reckon?
Yeah, good question. So I've heard the examples that you're mentioning, right? Like people just being locked out of their laptops. I have a very close friend of mine who unfortunately was laid off last year. And I believe he was in a customer meeting or a customer conversation. Somehow he checked his email afterwards. And I believe 5 minutes later, he was just completely like locked out of his laptop. Obviously still, I think, was able to read the email, but had no clue about anything else that was going on, because all of a sudden he couldn't access any of the work stuff, Slack or anything like that, couldn't inform his customers that he was working with at the time. And I think hearing those kinds of stories, it just is very painful for the people involved. I think the feelings, emotions that are happening, when you are laid off, are inevitable. But I think companies can do a lot in terms of informing their employees, like how do they communicate this. I do feel how LinkedIn handled that layoff in, I believe it was 2020, the first COVID year. People were actually prepared, like people knew that something was coming, it was being communicated. We knew how many people roughly in what department. And again, although it felt uneasy and we were all scared and it didn't feel good, at least there was some sort of group feeling around what was going to happen. And we had time and the opportunity to console each other and to be there for each other and to almost like prepare for that event that was going to happen. Which at least how I remember it, and might be different for the people who were actually laid off right at that point, but at least I felt like for us it was quite like a clear process. And I think that clarity and lack of communication is what often makes people feel extra upset and angry and disappointed, being locked out of your laptop all of a sudden and not being able to send a customer or a colleague like another message. I think those are the most painful points: lack of communication and just no real clarity around the process.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it in my experience: clarity around the process. Because a layoff, like other events in life, is actually quite traumatic. And I'm not saying that word lightly. I'm saying this from the research itself. Why do I say traumatic? Because a traumatic event is anything that happens outside of your control that you weren't able to affect. For example, like someone crashing into the side of your car, ranging from that to a layoff. When something happens, whenever anyone gets fired or laid off, there's reasons for that, and the mind and the body will go into a trauma response. There's going to be a period of maybe figuring out why, the sadness, the shock, the anger, and we can deal with those emotions. And I think that here's a thing that men and women maybe deal with those emotions differently. The point is, you can't control it, and there's ways that companies can manage the process of it in the way that they communicate. And when it's managed in a very, how do I say, empathetic, meaningful way, because I think no one really wants to lay off employees. No company wants to fire people. It's like pretty sad for the person firing them, but also more sad for the person being fired. No one wants to lay off, but it's about how can companies do this in a way that is empathetic. I'm probably going to speak about this next week with another one of our former HiBob colleagues, Toby.
Yeah, Toby.
Toby's a great guy. But I mean, what do you think about empathy? How can when companies have to lay people off, what can they do to do it in a manner that's maybe empathetic, that addresses the needs and the concerns of the people being laid off? Obviously, looking you at your laptop, it probably isn't the best way to go. But what do you reckon is the best way to go?
Well, like I just mentioned, I think the communication piece is of vital importance. Again, a lot of times companies, I think, have to lay off people, or, maybe unfortunate decisions have been made in the past, which resulted in, a restructuring or having to lay people off. I do think that there's a lot that companies can do before this whole process happens, because, a lot of companies have been overhiring. I guess a lot of pressure from investors to deliver on certain numbers, which resulted in lots of hiring. And then all of a sudden, when the results, are not as positive as the investors want to see, then that often results in layoffs. So I think there's a lot that can be done before they actually lay people off. But I think communication is key in this process. What I've heard from, whether it's clients that I've guided who were laid off themselves, or whether it's from friends who've been laid off themselves, close friends of mine, often the lack of communication, and therefore the lack of clarity, is the thing that bothers them most. Because again, as you just mentioned, being locked out of your laptop is something that I think nobody wants to experience, especially if you don't realize why this is happening, or have I been laid off? So I think just having a very clear process around layoffs is the very, most important step, from CEO with HR to department leaders being connected and discussing how a process is put in place, and like what steps are necessary to, communicate this to the people at the right time. I think that's of vital importance. I do realize that many times these decisions are being made either last minute or at very short notice. So oftentimes I think that's therefore means that there's like a lack of clarity in the process, or not enough time to create a clear process around layoffs. And then I think, that results into also a lack of communication, and I guess also time. Because when you're trying to cram a whole layoff process, or like the decision-making process, and then communication, into maybe a couple of weeks, you're going to miss a few marks, right?
It's basically crunch time. I mean, that's pretty much it. I mean, you're having to do something really suddenly, and it often is very sudden. But in terms of that communication and clarity piece, I think one of the most important aspects of communication is actually how someone being laid off will communicate with themselves. What are they going to say to themselves? Because there's certain things that you can't control. Layoff happen. What are you going to do next? And that's basically what this whole dive is about. What is your next career move? Anyone here who wants to ask any of us a question, you don't need to say you've been laid off yourself if you don't want to, but just ask us a question, and Jennifer and I can address that about what you can do if you are looking for any avenue for your next career move. And I guess the key thing that I've noticed here is that people who come to me tend to communicate maybe differently than they would to their friends, their family, or maybe someone who would come to you, Jennifer. We both help people navigate these situations. And I work predominantly with men, and you work predominantly with women. Men, the men who come to me are basically a bit like myself, in doing mode. They're basically like, they've been laid off. They give themselves, I don't know, a few hours to process it, go down to have a drink with their mates in the pub, speak to their wives, boyfriends, girlfriends about it. And then the next day, then they're already applying for jobs. That's what most of them think they should do and do. And I'm like, hang on, let's take a step back here. And sometimes they actually do that, end up in the next job, and all of those feelings of anger and frustration and sadness haven't been dealt with. What could they do differently, firstly, Jennifer? And secondly, how do women manage these situations of being laid off? I'm just curious,
Yeah. No, both great questions. So I mean, I guess there's no right or wrong in terms of how you handle this, because it's so personal. It's so different from person to person. I know a few women who've dealt with it in the way that you just described, and men doing the complete opposites. But I do definitely see a pattern there as well, with what you're mentioning. I think what is very important to realize is that there will be lots of emotions and lots of feelings
Mhm.
involved in this process. There are even experts saying that you actually go through the 5 stages of grief
Oh yeah, that's
when
true.
you're being laid off, right? So the denial, the anger, the, what is it again, bargaining, depression, and acceptance,
Yes.
I believe. And I think definitely trying to take the time to feel what you're feeling is of vital importance. I obviously speak with many women, also male friends or former colleagues of mine, about the layoff subject, where taking action too quickly can actually result in maybe making a decision that you regret later on in the process. And I think that's something that has happened a lot. And I'm not sure if you've or also heard that in your conversations, but I think therefore taking the time to really sit with your emotions
Mm.
will be a very important first step. Not to, again, there's many ways how people approach this, or how they feel. It's also important to not to try and not sit with your negative emotions for too long, because that could actually result into something worse.
Yeah, it's. Mm. I was
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say it's like the sitting with versus dwelling in. The
Exactly.
thing is, I mean, just taking a step back, I guess this all depends on how emotionally intelligent one is, as well as
Mm,
the situation itself. However, I can just speak for myself and people who come to me, is that something happens that does blindside them, like a layoff, and then immediately, if this is your modality to be in the doing mode, then you're immediately doing application here, do this, do that, do that, without even thinking or processing those emotions. And for me, uh, I'm basically very similar to what John, he commented over here. He's in the doing mode. He loves being in the doing zone, sweeping under the carpet. Sometimes I don't even know
mm,
what I'm doing. I had something happen to me about a year or two ago, and I wrote about this in my book, where, I was blindsided by an employer. And a few weeks went by. I went through those 5 stages, as you said. The shock, denial, and then one day I just sat down in the forest meditating, where I usually do. And all of a sudden, anger came up. I just noticed there was anger. I didn't go into a story. And I called up a friend of mine, like a wise Welsh man, about twice my age, called Gary. I just said to him, "Hey, Gary, I'm feeling a bit angry right now." He's like, "What's been happening, Alex?" And I was like, "Well, this happened, this happened, this happened. Oh yeah, and something happened at my company where they did this." And it was like blah blah blah. I kind of played it off nonchalantly. I didn't know why I was angry. It was like, so Alex, if a company did that to me, I'd be feeling fucked off. I'd be feeling angry. I'd be feeling betrayed.
yeah,
And then I was like, oh, fair enough. I didn't even realize I was angry. So stuff can happen, and we're so
yeah,
in on the doing that we don't even realize that we're angry. So I guess the question is, something happens like a layoff, there's no playbook for that, And
exactly.
there's no playbook of what to do, how to feel. But, when people dive into that doing mode, you know, how how do we even know what to do with our emotions? I mean, no one gives us the emotional playbook. It's basically a product, I would say, of maybe how emotionally intelligent you are in the beginning to feel
Yeah,
emotions. What would you
yeah,
say? Mhm.
yeah. I agree. I think some people might just think that whatever they feel is anger, but angry or anger can have a lot of different layers to it as well, right? There could be sadness, there could be anxiety related. And I think the most important thing is to, also talk to friends, family, maybe even a therapist about it. I love therapy, by the way. And I think that's also something that may not be talked about enough, like asking for help. Going through a layoff, like, you don't have to do this alone. And especially if it's hard to name emotions, or if it's hard to realize what you're feeling inside, it can actually help a lot to talk about it with, again, friends, family, a therapist, a coach, or anyone who wants to talk to you about this, really, to try and get some more insights as to what in the hell is happening to me, what am I feeling, and what can I do about it, right? And if you are able to name some emotions that you're feeling, naming and recognizing those emotions can actually be a very good step into separating yourself from that emotion and sort of creating some calmness in that whole situation of chaos that you're in.
I mean, at the end of the day, we are not our emotions. We're not our thoughts. And this is actually a realization that anyone can take away, whether they've been laid off or not, just a simple case. So often we live in what's called like an outside in understanding of the world. What's happening out there is actually what's happening to me. I have been laid off. I am angry about being laid off. And then you go into the story of it. That's actually not how the mind works, the brain works, the world works. Actually, everything is happening from the inside out, meaning that it's not even your perception of it, but that you see something out there in the world and you never see what's actually happening there. You filter it through your five senses and your brain and all of your past experiences and this and that. I'm not going to get into all that now because we're going to get off the subject. The point is, someone's being laid off and they're going to start thinking, mentalizing, and feeling emotions about it. And it's those emotions and thoughts act as a filter. Instead of going into a story or a thought, you can just basically recognize the fact, I'm angry. Simple as that. I'm angry. I'm sad.
Yeah.
Or like another person told me one time, I'm happy. They were very happy about being laid off. And then recognizing that as just something happening inside of yourself, then you have power to do something because you're responding rather than reacting. And that's basically where
Exactly.
I help people get to, and you help people get to. I mean, someone wants to come to either of us, I'll pop the details up on the screen briefly, but also like they can just reach out to us, at the end, because it's something that you help people with, that emotional component of it. And I was mentioning something about someone who was very happy. I know a guy, actually, one of my mentors, George. He worked for 30 plus years in the supermarket industry.
Wow.
Went up to the manager, and when he was told he's being made redundant, I met up with him and someone was like, "Hey, how are you feeling?" He had a huge smile on his face, and he was like, "This is brilliant." He was like, he doesn't have to work for a few years. He went out to
Wow. Yeah.
People deal with it differently, and it's recognizing emotion. Also, what Nabil said is that what is your predominant perspective? And what he said over here is that, we have options. Companies can lay off. We can also explore options over here. So it's also about the attitude and the perspective. Now, that's not to say that some people are going to feel really bad about a layoff, especially when you're working somewhere for a long time.
Yeah.
But I guess to this point that Nabil mentioned over here, there is a question of options and feeling empowered versus disempowered. So, Jennifer, like, someone has been laid off, they process the emotions. What's next for them? What is next for them with like figuring out their options,
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, it really depends on, I guess, how you've left the, like how you're feeling after being laid off. Because I agree with you I've spoken with friends or with clients who've been laid off and who actually said this in hindsight was the best thing that ever happened to me, because I now finally can take the time, the space to get some clarity for myself. And a lot of times people have been unhappy in their jobs for a while, and then the layoff happens, and it's almost a blessing in disguise because it finally creates, again, that environment where they can shift focus and try to see what else is out there. I've spoken with people who finally realize, like, this is the time where I can start my own business. I've been wanting to start my own business for so long. I've been laid off. Some people get, maybe a bit of like some money, as part of the layoff package that buys them a bit of time to focus on starting their own business. But I also have women coming to me who mention, now I finally have the time to try and understand what I really want in my career. They've been making choices just based on what job they're good at rather than what their dream career might be. And now they finally have the time to think about, what is my dream career? What do I really want out of life, in my career, my work-life balance? And then a layoff can actually mean having a choice to take a different path.
Yeah, exactly. It's about the choices that you have. And I guess it could be a blessing in disguise. The way that I view it is, when you have been laid off, jumping into your next role straight away without the processing and the thinking is a bit like, you've someone breaks up with you, and the next day you're on Tinder or Bumble or wherever, and then you find the next relationship a week later, a rebound. Maybe people do that themselves, rebound jobs. Have you ever heard of that, Jennifer? Like a
I
rebound?
haven't, no.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we just invented it now. But rebounding into a job, because here's the thing: when it comes to scarcity and lack, people rely on the job as a sense of security to get paid every week or month or however often, and that's taken away from them. They may think to themselves, "I've got to find another job." Go straight for the next one. Send out 50 applications, get another job. Is that workable? Is that wise? What do you think?
I've heard the term rage applying. I'm not sure if that applies to what you're mentioning.
Rage applying.
Yeah, I've heard it a lot, and it makes sense, I guess, for the action takers who feel like, I can't sit still, I need to just keep going. But as we mentioned, I think at the start of our conversation, the danger might be that you, for one, burn a lot of bridges, right? Because if you just start applying with maybe companies that might actually be a good fit for you, you might actually burn bridges by, rather than taking a step back and thinking about, what is the best next step for me? How do I want to brand myself with my resume, with my LinkedIn profile, but just go, go, go. It often leads to rejections. And therefore burning bridges, because if you rage apply or, quickly apply for 50 jobs after being laid off, and, you get rejected by all of them, it might actually mean that you don't get a second chance there, at least for a while. Maybe not forever, but maybe at least for like 6 to 12 months. And that's something that I think people should definitely keep in mind.
Yeah, so basically, rather than going forward with, I have to get another job, taking a step back and reflecting, what do I want? That's basically probably the most important question, I guess, anyone can ask themselves, right?
Yeah. And that's I guess that's the question that I get asked most when I have conversations with women about, I've been laid off, like, what's next? How do I decide what's next? Where do I start? Do I continue doing what I have been doing? Do I pick a completely new path? But basically, where do I start?
Yeah. So let's look into that, because a lot of people, when they ask me the same thing, where do I start? What's next? And for me, anyway, it always starts by going inward for them. Things like, what is their vision? What are their strengths? And also, equally, what don't they like? What are their, maybe, if you want to call it weaknesses, fair enough. But also, they've been working in a job for a certain period of time, months, if not years. What didn't they like about that part of the job? Because I don't think there's ever such like a unicorn company that gives us everything that we could possibly want. Maybe that exists somewhere out there. But yeah, looking back at their experience and thinking, what was I good at? What did I not like about the company and the people?
Yeah.
Going inward, what do you reckon?
I fully agree. I often recommend my own clients to work on an energy journal. And it sounds a bit fluffy, but it's to be very clear about, it's writing down exactly like you say, the tasks, responsibilities, the things that you really didn't enjoy. So basically that sucked the energy from you.
Yeah.
And obviously a second list with the tasks, responsibilities, projects that really energized you, that brought you in a state of flow, the things that really, really meant a lot to you. And if you keep a journal like that for 2 to 3 weeks, or even do that, looking back at your last job or jobs, oftentimes it will already be clear. You'll see some sort of pattern exist in terms of, was I in the right job to begin with? Did I really enjoy what I was doing? If the list with energy takers is 2 pages and there's only 2 bullet points on the list of things that gave you energy, it was either the company, but highly likely that it was the job that you were in that you weren't enjoying. And that can be a good starting point to figure out, again, starting points on figuring out what to do next.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, something that everyone can look at, even if they're in a job and not even thinking of changing. What are the tasks and the things they're doing that give them energy versus drain their energy? Something that I've done myself in other scenarios, funnily enough, without anyone telling me to. Just because I wanted to give more to myself, do things that give me energy in general. There's certain people, places, and things that maybe drain my energy. Just an audit of that. Another thing that I ask people to do and suggest to them is to write out their own job description, literally their own dream job.
I like that.
Yeah, literally and they can be as wild as they possibly want with this, or as realistic. It's really an exercise in creativity, so I get them to go wild with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, and things like, I'm not focusing so much on the things like the salary or the company name, more so like what the kind of things that they will be doing, what is going to give them energy, when they wake up in the morning. Because the number one thing that people come to me with, and this is beyond the job situation, layoffs, it's just in general, people will come to me and then say they wake up in the mornings and they can't face going to work. They can't face the day. They can't face seeing their clients, prospects, managers, colleagues. They literally feel unable to do that anymore. So their energy is already drained and they're already at breaking point, And people, when they come to you, maybe they have already been past that and they've been laid off. So how can they get their energy back?
Yeah, I think getting energy back is an important one. I think a part of the layoff process and the aftermath is also self-care. Really focusing on doing the things that you enjoy doing. And it sounds so obvious, but it's the thing that most people forget first when they're in a situation of uncertainty or being laid off. It's, people normally going to the gym, all of a sudden, rather staying in bed or staying at home, skipping meals with friends. They love hiking in the weekends. All of a sudden they, again, just stay inside, don't do the things that they enjoy anymore. And those are the first things to actually try and get back to doing, whether it's, like just the occasional walk around the park rather than going for a long hike, but at least taking small steps into the right direction. Because once you start doing the things that you enjoy, like that fire will light inside you and it will be a lot easier to then get back into your normal routine. I think that's definitely something that we haven't really highlighted yet, but I think is a vital process, part of the process to get back to feeling more like yourself.
Pretty much. And it's like one of the things that is, I guess, an open question for everyone. Have you prioritized that self-care? Because it's natural that when you have all these demands in your time, you have family over here and then you have a job over here and then this and that, the kids and everything else, and of course, then you have things like the Christmas holidays and you have your car breaks down, everything else, and self-care may fall away. Now, someone's just been given the gift of maybe an extra 8 hours in the day. What are you going to do with that? Prioritize self-care beforehand, and some may have, some may not, then that can easily fall away when you're working at a company, especially, again, I would say pre-COVID times, but now with people returning to the office, you have your commute, and then you're stuck in front of a laptop and with people. Where is yourself in that? And I love this topic of self-care. It's actually what my third book coming out in 2025 is being titled 7-Figure Self-Care, which means treating yourself like the most blessed, beautiful, and prosperous being in the universe, because that's what you are. People forget that about themselves. Yeah. And it's pretty, and the suggestion that I make to pretty much everyone who comes to me is, what is self-care for you? you can create a list of things that you love doing, those energy givers that we're just talking about now, you know, the thing that you suggest to your clients. What are the things that give you energy on a daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly basis? And it's not about adding more to do, it's just about feeling into where are those energy givers, and then you can think about the things that are taking away your energy and subtract them. Simple. I love getting a massage. I give myself a massage once or twice a week. You know, I love going for walks in the park. And in the UK, it used to be the forest because I live near the forest. In Lima, it's the desert. There isn't, and the nearest forest is the Amazon rainforest, and I can't fly there every day. But what I can do is, because I would go into the forest, take a walk there, spend an hour or two of my day there. That's pretty much it.
Lovely.
People forget self-care, nourishment. How can people do that? Especially, and I guess maybe especially for you, how can women do that? Especially because if they give themselves, I guess you've been told, you have to give yourself to your career and your family. This is something I think women maybe struggle with more than men. Men, of course, do put family first to a degree, but they aren't so-called enmeshed their entire lives to be a good mother and be a good wife and be a good this and be a good that. I think women more so than men. So what can women do to put themselves first?
Yeah. I think what also relates to that is that women, what I see from speaking with women on a daily basis, is that many women feel that it's a personal decision when they're being laid off. It's a personal attack almost. Attacked in their identity, status, daily structure. I think those are parts that men will also see. But what I definitely see is that it's very hard for women to distance themselves from the thoughts of, I did something wrong, or it was me, it was my fault that I was laid off. Because look, there are still so many of my valuable colleagues who, are still there. They were not laid off. So it must have been me. And I think that piece is something that, again, it's about confidence levels taking a big hit, which I think for women is something that's already a challenge at times on a good day, right? Confidence levels. So especially when being laid off, I think that's one of the main things that takes an even bigger hit. And then looking at how to balance feeling about yourself, confidence levels, and how you put yourself out there, trying to balance that with family life, trying to balance that with everything else. I would see that as one of the biggest challenges. And what helps many women is, as I mentioned before, the naming of the emotions, to sort of try and create a bit of distance between between the emotions and yourself, to try and get some, like, more of a feeling of calmness over you. And at some point, it does really help to start thinking about what's next. Before that, though, what can also help a lot, actually, for men and women, is to already start thinking about documenting achievements from your past roles. Because again, a lot of times when especially women feel like it's a personal attack when they're being laid off, they actually forget about all of their amazing accomplishments, and all they can see is, it must have been me, I must have done something wrong. And what actually helps in the process is to start documenting the things that went very well in your last job. And if you find it hard to write that down yourself, you can actually call in help from your former colleagues, your former manager, obviously depending on how your relationship was, but just asking them, what did I do well? What did you appreciate about me? And you'll often be surprised with the positive feedback you get from those interactions.
Pretty much. I think this is what, both men and women can do. I myself, I'm very bad at looking at the things that I've done well in my work, unless someone is telling me, because I'm so focused on the next thing to do, I don't even think about the thing that I did. Also, and this may be my own tendency, I'm not sure if this is the case with you, Jennifer, I have a tendency to think very negatively about certain aspects of myself. Example, I would be developing a sales training at Meta, for example. And the whole thing about working at Meta was it really helped me with my own imposter syndrome. so
Yeah.
much. And every single person in Meta has imposter syndrome, according to one of the colleagues on my team. And she was leaving the company a few weeks after I joined. I said to her, Rebecca, you ever feel like you shouldn't be here? She was like, Alex, every single person in the entire company feels that. So, and basically, what helped me was having a manager who basically was very constructive in the way she delivered feedback. And I would bring a sales training to her, and we would have these 3-hour-long meetings where she would tear into every single word on the slide. That's what helped me realize that actually I'm pretty damn good at what I'm doing, because when I went through that training process, that exercise, she would then give me some good feedback, but more so the people I training gave me great feedback. And it was this feedback loop that emerged, her telling me I'm doing really well, then getting more positive feedback, getting those results, and then those results, funny enough, went onto my CV for the next job, and I could document them. But what about you? Yeah, what about you, Jennifer? I mean, do you tend to have a tendency to think negatively, especially after a layoff? It's like you've been laid off, and then you look back at your career or your job, and you think to yourself, there's nothing going right. Like, do you go into that negative thought spiral yourself, or is it just me?
For sure. Yeah, for sure. I have made a couple of posts on LinkedIn about that in the past as well, about having and dealing with imposter syndrome, for instance. And I agree, it's real. A lot of people deal with imposter syndrome, and that obviously, again, takes a big hit when you're being laid off. It's, again, thinking about I'm not good enough. I wasn't good enough for the role, and all those thoughts that come with it. And there is a time and place for those emotions, especially, again, after you've been laid off. Like, it is a time where you feel lots of emotions. Luckily, some will feel happy, but there are a lot of sad and unfortunate emotions that you will feel as well. I think the main thing is to try and ask for help if that's something that you're really struggling with. When I felt imposter syndrome, it really helped me, again, to look at my own accomplishments. Like, I actually, and I've mentioned it to many of my clients, but I actually have a folder on my Google Drive and on my desktop where I literally copy paste positive performance reviews, positive remarks that colleagues have sent me on Slack, like, thanks for your contribution to this project, or photos of me presenting a big event at LinkedIn, for instance, or me winning an award at work. I paste all those things into an online drive and onto my desktop. So whenever I do feel like an imposter, and that still definitely happens to me, I literally open that folder and I can see all the positive things that people have said about me, all my accomplishments. And I pick a different one every time. And it helps so much to instantly see, this is my mind playing tricks on me. This is not reality. This is not real, what I'm feeling. Exactly. And that might be something that helps others on this call as well.
Pretty much, because we play tricks on ourselves. We have cognitive bias. One of that is confirmation bias. Look for what you already want. If you think about yourself, I'm not good enough, then you're going to look for evidence of that. If you already have the evidence in front of you that you've collated, look at all my accomplishments, put it on a Google Doc.
Exactly.
100%. Then it means that you're programming yourself to, send happy hormones for your body, the things like the dopamine, the endorphins. Every time you look at that, you get energy. And there's going to be times, obviously, in anyone's day where you're going to feel like crap and you think to yourself, I'm not good enough. I've been laid off and now this has happened.
Yeah,
that's what we want to do, is put those achievements out there, especially in your next interview. Maria just asked, how can you turn the layoff into a strength? And what do you say in the future interview? I mean, this is something I think that pretty much everyone is like scared of. And what, there are cases like the Meta layoffs, for example. People knew about that. And you can say, as part of the Meta layoffs. Also, it may not be that case. What should people say in their next interview? They've been laid off, they've gone through this process, 3 months go by and they're interviewing again for their dream job. And it's obviously going to be the case someone will ask them, like, what happened at your previous job? It's a natural interview question. What should they say, Jennifer?
Yeah, Well, first of all, hey Maria, super happy to see you in this call. So it really is a personal question because I've spoken with women who don't want to hide the fact that they were laid off. They want to be open about it, and they've made a conscious decision that they want to be open about it. And then it's, what you mentioned, Alex, about I was part of the meta layoffs. I think is a great thing to say because there's been so many layoffs in tech. Nobody will be surprised right now. No recruiter, no hiring manager will be surprised if they hear someone say, unfortunately, I was part of the layoff round at whatever company. So that's one option. And again, if you feel comfortable sharing that. There are people, however, who don't feel comfortable sharing it because they might still be processing with all those internal emotions and all those feelings. And in that case, I would always recommend to stick to a story that you feel good about. And some people choose to go the route of simply deciding that they're looking for a new opportunity or were looking for another opportunity. And they actually try to phrase it in a positive way, like, hey, I saw this opportunity of whatever role it is. And, my last opportunity wasn't right for me, or I was looking for a new challenge. Then I saw this role pop up and I was like, this is the one for me. So almost creating a more positive story around why you're working towards the role that you're applying for or interviewing for, rather than focusing too much on looking back at an event that impacted you a lot. And I do see that this second approach works well for people who've been recently laid off. Over time, most people actually feel more comfortable and have accepted the fact that they've been laid off a bit better, and then they feel more comfortable sharing that they were part of a layoff, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so Maria, I hope that answers your question, but I guess it makes me think about, in general, the balance between transparency in an interview versus, some of the things that, you may need to process.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, it could be a case of that there could be a thing about being too transparent. And this is, of course, anyone interviewing is probably concerned about what to say. And I guess there could be a point to, almost speaking too much and basically saying what matters. I'm a fan of brevity. I think brevity is bold. So something as simple as, yeah, Meta had layoffs, or this company had layoffs. I was affected by that. I mean, versus like going into a story. What do you think, Jennifer? Like, how would you articulate it? Say you had an interview. Yeah, actually, let's do role play now. I'm interviewing you.
I mean, I am.
Yeah.
No, I am always, and I'm an open book. So for me, it works very well. Like I am a very emotional person. I know that of myself, and I am very well at, I do very well with sharing my emotions openly. I own my emotions and I'm proud of them. So for me, it actually helps to accept whatever situation I've experienced by talking about it and just mentioning how I felt about it. Obviously, there are ways to it. So I would also mention, like, yeah, I was part of the layoffs of, whatever company it was. And I would use it as an opportunity to actually highlight what I've been doing in the meantime. So there are obviously people who will take a bit of time out to figure out what they want to do in their career. Do they want to make a career switch? Do they want to start their own business? Or just people who want to take some time off, rest, recharge, maybe do some courses. So for me personally, I would actually try and highlight sort of what personal journey I've been on while I, was laid off or took some time off for myself. And I agree with you. It shouldn't be, a 10-minute story, but I think in a couple of minutes you should be able to share maybe your learnings from it, or what courses you've done and what skills you gained from those courses. So kind of like sharing that you made the most out of that time that you weren't working.
Yeah, pretty much. I think like flipping it in whatever way that means
Yeah.
for you. I mean, of course, like when I speak to the fact of brevity, what I mean is that not share a 5-10 minute sob story.
Yeah, exactly.
At the same time, there's such a thing as like saying too little. If like, say for example, that Jennifer, you're now interviewing me, and I've been laid off by a company, and saying, "Oh yeah, what happened at your previous company?" And I was like, "I was affected by the layoffs." And then you just stop there the next time.
Silence.
It's a bit awkward, isn't it? Yeah, it's a bit like,
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
okay, and like, then what? They want to hear what you've done next. Another thing that
Exactly.
you could do is actually flip it around on the employer, because as I think Nabil mentioned earlier, I'm actually going to see what he said earlier. Yeah, he actually said, we have options. Talent has options on the job market. Interview processes, any interview, the person looking for a job, you're also interviewing the company. Flip it on them. Yeah, I was affected by the
100%.
layoffs. Yeah, the tech layoffs that you've probably heard about at Spotify. Let's say Spotify, for example. And what I'm looking for in my next company is a place where I can grow my career for the long term. So, because I was badly burned by this, if that's the language you want to use, because I was badly burnt, like, what assurances can you give me? Because a lot of companies like Spotify, they were over hiring and had to meet numbers, but something like that,
Great point.
yeah,
Yeah.
flip it.
Great point. Great point.
And I suppose that these are other concerns that people are thinking about, when, because naturally people, if they do decide they want to go for another job and an interview, which they may not, they may want to spend more time with their families or go traveling.
Yeah.
A lot of people who have done, they spent like 6 or 9 months traveling, which is wonderful, or build a business or a side project, but say that someone does go back for an interview. What are the other things that they can do? Because the interview process is very nerve-wracking. Is what I call a high-pressure social situation where people may sweat, throat tightens up, heart pounding like this. So what are some interview tips for people, Jennifer?
Yeah. So I always say practice makes perfect. And it might be a cheesy thing to say, but I think many people underestimate how much practicing for an interview can help you reduce nerves or be less nervous for an interview. Of course, it is normal. I was a hiring manager before, so I've had lots of people interview, to potentially be part of my team. And it is completely normal to be nervous. And luckily, lots of interviewers or hiring managers will do their best to put you at ease and make sure that it's a safe environment and that they're there to help you as well. But I think practicing those situations, like how would you respond to certain questions, even about presenting like the fact that you were laid off, how you want to do that, like practicing those things can actually help reduce nerves so much. And you can practice with a friend, you can practice with a coach or a mentor, you can practice with a colleague or a former manager, anyone you feel comfortable with who wants to listen to you. I think that is actually key to reduce nerves.
Yeah. And another thing about nervousness that I've come to realize is that when you're not feeling nervous, that's when the stakes aren't high enough. You're probably not going to give an interview. Like, I love those. I used to hate it, but whether I was stepping on stage, going out on a date, or entering into a job interview or delivering a training, if I'm not feeling nervous, how can I channel that energy, which is effectively adrenaline, the nervousness, the butterflies in your stomach are literally adrenaline. You can channel that outwards, and recognize this is a high pressure situation where there's stakes and you want the job. Because you want the job, that's why you're nervous. So channel that into them. And we only have about 2 minutes left. So Jennifer, if anyone wants to reach out to you, then they can at hello@jenniferpaine.io. That's the best way for people to get in touch with you. Is that right?
Yeah, or through LinkedIn. If you just search my name on LinkedIn, they're also very happy to receive any messages there. And so if anyone needs help, whether it's resume tips, like how to use their LinkedIn profile in the job search, interview tips, anything at all, I'm very happy to help.
Yeah. So you can reach out to Jennifer on LinkedIn, reach out to myself on LinkedIn. Next week, we're going to have Toby, another HiBobber. Bobber colleague. Wow, Bob. He's probably going to be there. I was about to say for the rest of his life. I don't know. Toby is HiBob. I would love to say that actually.
Yeah.
First people I met on day one of the job, and we'll be talking about something similar. We'll talk about how HR is your ally, But Jennifer, is there any words of wisdom that you want to leave anyone with before we wrap this up now?
Well, I mentioned it at the start of the conversation, but the fact that you don't have to go through layoffs alone. So just ask for help if you feel like you need it, because there are so many people out there who are offering to help you in a tough situation.
Yeah, layoffs can be lonely. There's a life after layoffs. You don't have to do it alone. So if you want that help, feel free to reach out to Jennifer or myself or any trusted people in your network. And I hope those watching it got a lot out of it. See you next week, if not before then. Bye.
Bye.